Hi, my name's Sam Mickelson, founder of True Worth. We're a talent solutions business, so it's all about people. And that's why we created a podcast channel. We wanted to bring together members of our True Worth collective, our clients, candidates, generally anybody in tech that wants to come and talk about their experience as a person, products, platforms, or projects that they've been involved with. So you can find us on all of the normal podcast channels and platforms. Links to all of our socials are in the description. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much and enjoy the episode.
This podcast with True Worth Tech Talks. Today we are going to be talking to Adam Marsh. Adam is a specialist data contractor and founder of a startup business called Be Intelligent. Adam started his career as a graduate BI consultant back in 2013. He's worked for data startup for about 5-6 years and then has worked in retail, not-for-profit and sports, and then moved into the utility sector before taking a bit of a leap of faith after getting married. And he moved into contracting to start up his own consultancy business. Be Intelligent is focused on providing clients with bespoke solutions that solve specific pain points using data. So welcome, Adam. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sam. It's great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Just want to start off, if that's okay, Adam, just giving us a little bit more kind of your history and start, I guess, where, you know, when you got into data, why, what sort of drew you into being, a data consultant right at the start?
So originally, when I was at university, I studied information technology management for business, and the course was very much split between the technical side of things and also the business side of things. And it was about being able to have someone sit in the middle of the two and bridge the gap. So be able to speak to the technical team and understand what they're saying, but then also speak to the business side of things and be able to understand what they're saying and translate between the two. In terms of getting into data, it's quite a bit of a strange one. I actually applied for a job, and I just happened to have fallen into it. I actually got talked into going for the interview by my parents because I was on a bit of a downward spiral at the time, because I'd had quite a few interviews and not really got anywhere with anything. And at the time I was living down south, somewhere near London, and it was kind of, the interview was up in Manchester, and I was a bit kind of deflated, and do I really want to be spending 150 quid or whatever it was at the time to get the train up for potentially another interview that I'm not going to get, another job? So that's how I got into it. I kind of fell into it, but I've loved it ever since. That's why I've stuck around for so long. So I've been working in the field now for around 10 years, which is quite amazing to think. Actually, it's gone quite quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're a little bit younger than me, but as you get older, you blink and you miss it, and all of a sudden 5-10 years have gone by very, very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so that's where I started. And then, as you say, I joined a startup business, was there for around 6 years, held various different positions, predominantly client focused, building reports, scoping out projects, delivering training sessions, stuff like that. I then decided to leave that business and move on to a few other different companies and different sectors and things like that, which were focusing on retail and utilities and various other bits and bobs, before ultimately deciding to, as you say, take the leap of faith and move into contracting, of which I've been contracting for about 4 or 5 months now. Okay. But the ultimate goal is to get kind of the Be Intelligence, the business that I founded, off the ground and get that moving. But it's a long road, so I'm not expecting it to happen overnight.
Good man. Well, listen, fair play to you for taking the leap. contracting isn't something to be sort of sniffed at in terms of going from the comfort or stability of a permanent role and then moving into contracting. So fair play. And I know you're about to start, or you're working with a couple of clients at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing for them without going into too much detail. But I guess I wanted to focus today on BI and reporting, because that's an area of specialism for you. And so I'll start with, people talk about this single source of truth. And for those that don't know, what is that?
So single source of truth is something that's incredibly important within an organization. So what it allows you to do is, so you have multiple data sets, which could be anything from something from a database all the way down to something what's on a piece of paper that someone's written down. Everything is effectively classed as data or information. And what a single source of truth is basically building an infrastructure or an architecture where all that information is being stored in a single place, and then the various business logic is being applied to that information to make meaningful sense of it before it's then being extracted out and distributed around an organization. But that single source of truth effectively means that everyone's working off the same play sheet.
Okay, all right. And not many companies get that right first time, do they?
No, not many companies do, and it's from my experience, very large companies are still grappling with that and trying to get a hold of that, because it's obviously technology, if you like, is quite a new thing. Some of these companies have been there for quite a long time. And on the flip side of that, startup companies aren't necessarily thinking about the data and how it's structured and where it's being placed, purely because they're constantly looking at growing as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So it's almost an afterthought. And it's something that a lot of companies, I think, are starting to wake up to and realize and have the realization that they need it. But I think a lot of companies struggle to understand how to do it and how to do it effectively and successfully.
And so for companies that want to start, what's the best thing for them to do to start off with?
The best thing to do is to, first of all, identify your main data sources, if you like. So in some worlds it might be Salesforce, in others it might be another type of CRM system or whatever it may be. But when I've gone about, or my approach that I've taken when doing that activity, is basically looking at the end result. What is it you're trying to report on? What are the KPIs and metrics that you're interested in seeing? And then almost working backwards. Because what I've found over time is actually by identifying what it is you want to look at, that tends to lean towards what applications you may need to connect to and basically put into a more structured manner.
Okay, all right. And when it comes to data silos, again, terminology that people might not be familiar with, give me a few examples of what's a data silo and how do companies kind of remove those silos?
So data silos are very similar to just silos that people in organizations or things that organizations have experienced for many, many years, where it's effectively the left hand is not talking to the right.
Okay.
Whilst they've got the information in the organization, others within that organization may not be aware of it, may not know how to access it. And actually, if they did have access to it, it may be incredibly useful and powerful for them to have that information, depending on what it is they're doing. So, for example, it could be someone in sales that is actually wanting to look at more customer insight kind of information. And actually, they may be aware of the information and that they've got it, but they don't actually know how to access it. Likewise, it might be someone in finance who's just wanting to look at a bigger picture of the organization, but they don't have all the different data sources available to them. And they may not even be aware that someone, let's say in HR, is actually been collecting information on a specific, for a specific KPI, but it's just never been obviously passed around the organization, never been really shared. It's just something that someone's done off their own back.
And that's common, isn't it, with bigger companies, isn't it? Where
it certainly is. Yeah.
Well,
So go on, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that where one person might be sometimes collecting some data that somebody else in the business is doing exactly the same thing. They're repeating each other.
Yeah. So So you can have a duplication of work, and as you said, as companies get bigger, that tends to happen a lot more often than people realise as well. Just through sheer size of the business, and obviously so many different moving parts, it's quite difficult to keep track of what everyone is doing at any point in time on any given day.
And so how do you find companies track that then? What sort of processes or bits of technology or products do you put into that business to help them?
So the way I go about doing that in terms of building the reports and gathering that information is going and speaking to the different stakeholders, and that may be anyone from C-level, or it might be actually the people who are actually doing the collection of the information, just asking the questions as to why they're collecting it, what's it used for, where they're storing it. And then once that's all been gathered, it's then about understanding how to take that information and put it somewhere where it's actually going to be beneficial to the organization and to the users who are going to want to ultimately access it. In terms of applications and things, there's obviously many out there, but I tend to find some of the best of things like Jira and Confluence and stuff like that, because it effectively allows you to store everything there, and you can then also start to track it and delegate it to individuals. To say, if you've got a team of data engineers, you can then obviously assign that to someone for them to start looking at pulling or extracting that information into that system that's been developed at the time.
And I guess one of the big challenges for you, coming from being working as a permanent employee, starting off as a consultant, working for clients, then going as an internal data consultant or BI report writer, effectively, and being that internal person, to then being a contractor where you've got to go and speak to people and ask them about their reporting requirements. You've got to have, there's got to be a bit of sort of social skills around that, hasn't there? And communication skills, I guess.
Communication is by far the most important skill when it comes to delivering projects and discussing these different data sources with clients, because ultimately you're going in as the expert. Yeah. You're going in, you're being seen as the experts, and the one who's ultimately, you've got the experience to be able to develop whatever it is that's been asked or that's been specified. And it's also just as important is being able to understand when things aren't possible, and not trying to over deliver. It's great. I know it's always great to over deliver and over promise, but it's actually, when you get to the end of it, you need to make sure that actually the basics are being delivered to fulfill the requirements. If you go over and above, it's fantastic, and I've done it a couple of times, but it's always a nice to have.
I worked with a retailer a few years ago, and it was working with the head of data at that particular retail business. And he explained to me that his function was really, really new. It was a data science function. But he talked about trying to win hearts and minds within the business and identify what he called low-hanging fruit, quick wins. And so he had some pretty big ideas and ambitions about what he wanted to help the business do and achieve, but he realized that he couldn't run before he could walk. He had to win hearts and minds with a few smaller projects initially, to get people to buy into what they were trying to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that something that you've experienced as well? And what could you give me some examples of that?
It is something I've experienced, and ultimately we're all chasing the North Star. We all want the big projects and delivering the big projects, but ultimately it always goes back to kind of the Lego blocks and building that foundation and building and putting those blocks in place in the right manner, in order to then be able to very quickly scale that up. I've seen it time and time again where clients have asked me to develop a suite of reports, for example, and rather than going, right, we want a finance report or we want a HR report, what they want is a HR report with some finance information, some budgeting, some forecasting, and some other things. And then when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, it's a case of, okay, so where's this information being stored? How we're going to access it? Oh, we don't know. We don't know where it's being stored, or it's being updated by someone manually on a daily basis. And then you get into this conversations around, okay, so the first thing we need to do is then look to move that information so it's somewhere that's A, accessible, and B, is easy to get access to, purely because if that individual who's updating that information, for example, is on annual leave for 2 weeks, we can't afford to have that have an impact on the business. Because if that does happen, it then means the reports that are being developed aren't going to be a true reflection of what's happened, because some of that budget information, if it is being updated daily, might be 2 weeks out of date, for example. And I've seen that time and time again with a lot of companies trying to build very, very high spec, if you like, reports, but using very basic technology in terms of like Excel and stuff. And there's obviously many, many other technologies out there that can do a much better job of it.
So in software development, they talk about an MVP, don't they? Minimal viable product.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes where you want to get to first in data and reporting?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, whenever I approach a project, I try to communicate it as clearly as possible what the deliverables are, but also try to work in. I know there's a bit of a buzzword when everyone talks about agile and stuff, but I always try to work in an agile manner where I almost treat report building as developing a piece of software. So when developing a piece of software, it might be, depending on what sprints and things you're doing, you'd have a developer develop something, and if the time frame may be a week or 2 weeks, but within that a week or 2 weeks, they'll have something that's ready for testing. And I take the same approach when building reports. I'll build something, I'll spend a week, and I'll build and deliver as much as possible. Then I'll distribute that to the stakeholders for them to provide feedback. And I always caveat it with saying, this is just the phase one. There is more things to come because we've discussed it and I've captured the information. But what I'm ultimately trying to do is get it in front of someone so they can start to review it and understand it. Because I've found time and time again, a lot of people fall into one of two categories where they either say, I want this report, which is something they've already got, they're used to it, and that's what they want. Or it's a case of, we don't really know what we want, we just want you to come up with something. And if it falls into the second category, it's always better to work in that kind of weekly, if not or 2 weekly cycle, where you're constantly providing people with an updated version of that view. Because even simple things like changing colors or changing the actual charts themselves, it as the reports develop and get more involved, it takes more and more time to make those changes. But besides that, it's also given the end users a chance to actually check the information is correct as well.
And I guess your early career working for a consultancy has really helped you in that respect, hasn't it? Manage expectations, taking the right spec down, qualifying what people want, and making sure then you do deliver on it.
Absolutely. So when I first started as a graduate, I was responsible for delivering projects in around a week. So I'd be on site with a client for a week and deliver the KPIs and the metrics that they were wanting to see. And at the end of it, there was always a training session. So I'd be training people on how to use that report and how to interact with it correctly. But there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just what KPIs do you want to see, the visualization of it also has to be considered. Things like people who are colorblind, all that kind of stuff. Also, putting yourself in the end user's shoes and thinking, well, what happens if I click on this? What happens if I click on that? And then you've also got to think about things around. You've also got to think around things such as, how could someone potentially see something that they shouldn't be able to see? And I know I've had it once in my early career when I first started out, where I think it was someone in HR shouldn't be able to see like the overall head count or something like that, and somehow they could get to it. So it's just working through all that as well.
Yeah, it's not a simple, straightforward process, is it? And
not.
Talking about before about kind of guesswork, I know that you talked about this sort of finger in the air type of management. How do companies kind of eliminate those assumptions?
So I've seen it time and time again where, again, you'll be building reports, and one of the first things I try to do is establish effectively a benchmark. So if it's a sales figure, or if it's a headcount figure, or if it's whatever it may be, it's a case of, okay, so what is the current company's belief? Let's say it's sales. So the company's sales, or their belief that their sales is 10,000 sales a month for whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then when you start going into the data and you start looking at it and you start applying the business justifications for why that number should be there, and then what it allows you to do is, if you get that number, fantastic. I think that may have only happened once for me. Normally what happens is you end up with like 9,950. Right. But because you've applied everything and you've got that justification as to why that number is that, it's then about informing people and saying, well, actually, when you go back to your reports and you look at what you've created, have you thought about all the different things you suggested to me? Because obviously I've seen it whereby clients are doing these things, but they're doing it manually. So there's always an element of human error. There's also the element of they've downloaded that information and it's not live. So they're looking at basically snapshots of information from, let's say, 2 hours ago. Whereas when I'm working on it, I'm looking at it as of 30 seconds ago, depending on how often it's been refreshed. So I always tend to, when I'm speaking and working with clients, I always tend to say we probably need to build some sort of tolerance in. Depending on what the information is, depends on what the tolerance should be. If it's finance, it's normally very close to maybe 1% or something, because normally you can get the figures pretty spot on. Other things tend to be a little bit more of a guess game, and that goes back to what you were saying about this finger in the air scenario, where a lot of companies are managing or being managed based on information which isn't inaccurate, but it's not the full picture.
Yeah.
So it's about basically making that lens a lot more focused on what is actually true and what's not true.
What have you found in your career? What are the main challenges that you've seen that these businesses have?
The main challenges that I've seen is all to do with understanding the technology, for one, having the time and resource to develop this stuff, because a lot of companies, whilst they always would like to have more insightful information and better decision making and stuff, I tend to find that when it comes to data analytics, especially, it's normally always the cherry on top. It's normally always that thing that's thought of last, because it's more of those conversations where, right, sales is doing great, marketing is doing great, everything else is going to plan. Now let's focus on the reporting and developing that. And if anything else outside of reporting falls over, then the business completely changes focus and focus on that. And that can depend on the size of the business. Obviously, if it's a smaller business, there's fewer people available to be able to just focus on one thing. They kind of have to prioritize. Larger companies, whilst they have the manpower, let's say, to be able to handle more things, they obviously have more things going on as well. So there's more things that could go wrong. And I always remember I was working with one particular client once where we were discussing, it was kind of in the final days of the project, and we were discussing about handing work over and what I'd been able to deliver and what I'd not been able to deliver and things like that. And so we were sat at this guy's desk, and we were talking about, so we need to do this and we need to do this, and I'll show you how to build this so you're more familiar with the products. And he said, yeah, I'll start looking at it next week. And literally, as we was having this conversation, someone walked in and put down, it must have been a binder full of A4 stuff that he needed to work through. And I just turned around to him and said, you're never going to be able to look at this, are you? And he said, probably not. So from that, it then led to another conversation around managing time and managing expectations, and ultimately that the business decided to get us back in to do some more work because they just didn't have the resource and capacity to do it. So
Wow. Okay. Now you've recently joined our collective, the True Worth Collective, which we're pleased to have you as part of that network. I know we're fairly small at the moment, but we're growing, and it's great to see this kind of diverse set of experience and skill sets in there from people like yourself that are very heavily data focused, but also we've got cloud architects level people, we've got project managers, business analysts, we've got even quite senior level, almost CTO level people in there as well. And we want to offer that service to clients who have got challenges, whether that be something related to cloud or data. For you, if it was a client that was looking for some help in their reporting, when you first speak to somebody to find out what's going on, what do you reckon you could achieve in an hour by talking to a client to sort of maybe take that first step?
I think within an hour of speaking to a client, I'd because of experience and obviously been around the houses a few times, I'd probably be able to get a pretty good handle and grasp on what their current pain points were, and then be able to start discussing with them how to go about resolving those problems and potentially putting some caveats, I suppose, in place as to how long that is going to take and setting real expectations, rather than saying, oh yeah, I understand your problem and we'll be able to sort it out in 3 weeks. If I've learned over the years, it's always better to be just to be honest with people. If something's going to take 6 weeks rather than 3, you're better off just saying it.
Yeah.
People would rather be able to set expectations from the get-go and say, you said it was going to take 6 weeks, it's taken 7. Okay, things overrun, but it's not like saying it's going to take 3 and then it's been delayed by 4 weeks, because depending on the organization, they're probably waiting on that stuff to be built and delivered, so then they can start moving on to the next step, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So being really honest, managing expectations, really key. And
yes.
Okay. All right. And understanding where the client wants to be, what's their goal, what are they trying to achieve, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It all comes out in what I would call it a scoping session. So it'd be sitting down with them and understanding, like you said, their end goals, where they are at the moment, and then kind of plotting the path as to how to get from A to B in the quickest time possible, but keeping it realistic, not, like I said, not trying to undersell something and then trying to work, all hours to deliver something.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Okay. Well, listen, I want to finish off asking you a quick question of really, if you sort of look back to Adam in 2013, when he's starting out in his career in BI, what would you say to him now?
A good question. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I think it'd be
what advice would you give him then?
In terms of advice, it'd probably be to focus. A long time ago, actually, I had a conversation with someone, and I was very, very focused on getting to higher levels of management and doing that kind of stuff. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was just make sure you're good at the technical stuff, all the management side of it, running teams, running projects even, and not, setting up a business and all that kind of stuff will happen. Just make sure you're good at the technical stuff to start with. And that's something that's always stuck with me, and that's something I focus on doing on a daily basis almost, is keeping in touch with the technology and where things are going and how things are working and stuff. As years have gone on, it's got a lot easier with LinkedIn and various other forms of media to be able to keep in touch with it all. I think probably back in 2013 it might have been a bit harder, and also starting out I didn't really know what I was looking for and who to look, who were they kind of go-to people to speak to about stuff as well. So,
and that's a lovely place to finish the today's episode, really. But also to add in there, I'm glad that you're part of the network that we're building. I think you've seen some value from it by just communicating with the other people in the network who've given you a little bit of help and advice and guidance. And that's what we're all about, helping others to progress and get better and do more and learn more, I guess. So thank you for joining us, Adam. Really, really, really do appreciate it. And if there's anything else you want to finish on.
No, just want to say it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I'll leave it there.
All right. Thanks very much indeed, Adam.
Cheers. Thank you.